Hello guys, thank you very much for joining in. We're going to be starting out with this chapter which is called as Net Zero. It is the 8th chapter on the new edition in the SCR exam. Okay, and it's a fairly simple chapter. There are a few case studies in the second part of the chapter. Not all of them are important. We're going to be highlighting the important part, and I'll also be running a PPT so that you guys can see some important points, and also I'll be highlighting important sections. Let us start with the discussion. Okay, so when we talk about net zero, okay, the chapter goes and discuss about what is going to be the introduction of the net zero part. Okay, that is what is being highlighted over here. Okay, and then they have moved towards the science behind the net zero concept. Let us first talk about the introduction. So, what is net zero? Net zero primarily means that as human beings, when we are going to emit carbon into the atmosphere, which is going to be there because we are going to be having economic development, we should have some mechanism to remove or to sink, okay, or remove carbon from the atmosphere. So the net effect of both you emitting carbon and the you removing carbon should be equal. The net effect should be zero. That is why the concept of net zero comes into picture. And a lot of these global standards now, a lot of these global initiatives are moving towards net zero, that our country will become net zero by 2040, 2060, like that. Okay, so India also has the net zero effect by 2070. Okay, now this section talks about that there is a near linear relationship between the cumulative net emission of CO2 and other CHS, greenhouse gases. What it simply means that the way CO2 is changing, okay, the overall composition of greenhouse gases are also changing, and it is having an indirect effect on the temperature on the planet. So it indirectly means that if there is any increase in the greenhouse gas, it is eventually going to lead to an increase in the temperature. These two are the first points which are important. If you go to the book, and over here, they're trying to highlight, it has been long understood that the near relationship between the cumulative CO2 and other gases are there, and any change in that will lead to a change in the temperature. So this part is important from the exam perspective. First two lines, it simply means that if the CO2 in the atmosphere is going to increase, it will eventually have problem, and the temperature will also increase. Okay, the next part, halting anthropogenic climate. What is this anthropogenic? It means human driven. So if there is any, if you want to stop the human driven climate change or human driven release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, okay, then you will have to make sure that there is a balance. If you read this section, they're saying reaching a balance between the greenhouse entering the atmosphere and those removed are called as sink. So if you look at this diagram also, they are saying something talking about environment. So there is greenhouse going into the environment and greenhouse being absorbed also, absorbed through land and biosphere. Then there is a approach, which is a carbon capture approach, which we have seen in first chapter. All of that can basically balance out, and you can have a durable net zero situation. Okay, so the total emission that we are doing from the greenhouse effect, it should be able to stabilize the temperature. That means the way we are emitting, it should be in such a way that we should remove some carbon dioxide also. The combined effect should be net zero so that the temperature on this planet can be stabilized. That is the intention. Okay, over here when we talk about net zero, we are talking about all the greenhouse gases, okay, greenhouse emission. So we are saying the overall greenhouse emission that is happening in the atmosphere and the overall greenhouse gases removed from the atmosphere. The net effect should be zero. So if you go to the book, they're talking about the global concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will lead to further warming. Okay, if you want to stop anthropogenic climate change, then you need to have a balance between the greenhouse entering and greenhouse being removed. Same logic, okay? And if you are able to do it, then only you'll be able to stabilize the global temperature. Okay, the first entire section is an introduction to the net zero concept. Now, the next part is the net zero and 1.5 degree target. So we have also heard about 2 degree temperature target and a 1.5 degree temperature target. What is this discussion between that is being explained in this next section. If you go to the next section, the first part. So when Paris Agreement was introduced, okay, the intention of the Paris Agreement was to halt human-induced climate change so that we should not have increase in the temperature. Okay, and if you want to do that, Paris Agreement also recognized that the anthropogenic emission, that means the carbon dioxide that we are removing out or we are introducing into the atmosphere, and the greenhouse gases being removed, there should be a balance between them. And that is where the concept of net zero comes into picture. So the first major forum where this concept of whatever carbon dioxide you're pushing in should also be removed, that was discussed in the Paris Agreement. But Paris Agreement came out with a 2 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. So what Paris Agreement was saying, that we are okay to have 2 degrees Celsius temperature. Okay, this was the level of stabilization, but there has to be an effort. There has to be an effort on making sure that the temperature does not go above 1.5 degrees. So there were two numbers, 1.5 degrees Celsius and a 2 degrees Celsius. When we talk about temperature increase, okay, so what Paris Agreement is indirectly telling you that our effort to make sure that the temperature increase, okay, the best effort should be till 1.5 degree Celsius, but even if it goes to 2 degrees Celsius, we are okay with it. This will also help us to stabilize the temperature at that level. Okay, and whenever we're talking about this 1.5 degree, 2 degree, we are giving a reference of pre-industrial level. All of this discussion is there in your second chapter itself. Okay, now look at this section. The 1.5 degree that came out. So there were two numbers, 2 degree and 1.5 degree. So 1.5 degree got a lot of political consensus that this can be our aspiration. That okay, this is the best effort part. We want to reach at this level, at the best effort part, and we are going to work towards it. Okay, so the scientific assessment, more than the scientific community, the political community gave consensus and they accepted this 1.5 degree increase as a standard for them. So Paris Agreement became the first international agreement which was talking about some ambitious target, okay, of emission at the global level. I'll take a pause over here. So if I go towards this book section, okay, so they were talking about a balance between the anthropogenic emission by source of greenhouses. Okay, the Paris Agreement hold an increase, the same point, 2 degree Celsius increase and a 1.5 degree. So that Paris Agreement discussion is given over here. Okay, and the target that we talked about, 1.5 degree, got a lot of political consensus rather than the scientific assessment being done. It was more accepted by the political players that this is the agreement that we are going to be looking out. And this was the first international agreement that talked about global warming and coming at some level of target, which all the political players are, or the countries are now having a common goal to achieve. Okay, now there is a discussion point which talks about how did we reach out at 1.5. Okay, so there was some, when we initially gave a 2 degrees Celsius increase above the pre-industrial level, there was a lot of criticism on it. Okay, they were saying, why are we not going for 1.5? Why there's a difference of 0.5 degrees Celsius? Okay, so initially 2.5 degrees to 2.2 degrees Celsius faced a lot of criticism, stating that this is an unacceptable amount of risk, because if the temperature increases 2 degrees Celsius above, it is definitely going to have a lot of climate change, and it is going to have a lot of physical damage to the companies, to government on this planet. So when initially it was created, okay, so a lot of countries, they started asking question that why we can't focus on 1.5 and why we can't have a possible pathway to reaching 1.5. So then the IPCC, which is also a committee, they came out with a special report. They came out with a report, which is, there is a table also in the book which talks about what is an impact of that extra 0.5 warming. Okay, and in the report they came out, the conclusion that came out, that the difference of 0.5 can be very substantial for the planet. It is not simple 0.5. It simply means that increase is going to have a huge impact on the planet. Okay, and that is where the ratcheting happened. Now, ratcheting over here means everybody started moving towards that 1.5 degree target, and it became a de facto standard. That means everybody's global ambition now was focused on 1.5 degree. This came out in first it came out in the special report, okay, which was highlighted over here. Okay, but there were other meetings also that happened that triggered it. So I'll go to that section also. But now the de facto standard is 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, which is now used by climate advocates and any country as their ambition to reach. This is where we have to stabilize the temperature. If I take a pause over here, okay, so this is the section that talks about the 2 degrees Celsius target criticism. Then IPCC came out with special report talking about the difference, and they said the difference is very, very substantial. Okay, and then once they realized this, the ratcheting happened on global ambition. That means everybody started changing the 1.5 degree Celsius, but ultimately this ambition was codified in the 2021 Glasgow Climate Pact, which means even though special report was there, the actual recognition for that 1.5 degrees Celsius came out in 2021 Glasgow Climate Pact. And more information is given over here. And the intention in that Climate Pact forum, okay, we focus more on what is going to be the impact of that extra 0.5, and everybody focused that, okay, we will resolve to a best effort to limit the temperature increase by 1.5 degree Celsius. And that became the major target, okay, the target for all the companies. Okay, but the challenge with this kind of target was that if you want to achieve this, there is going to be a major challenge for you as a country. Why? Because then you will have to make sure that the carbon that has been already been emitted, or the way you're doing the business, the way the economy is being run, there is to be sharp reversal in that emission trend, which means you'll have to take a very high amount of effort to make sure that that 1.5 degrees Celsius target is reached. Okay, and that is what is being highlighted in this section. There is a section also in the book which talks about the report, the special report talking about the difference between 1.5 degrees Celsius and a 2 degrees Celsius. And over here they have given you how it is going to impact the climate. Okay, for example, additional 10 million people are estimated to get risk of flooding, okay, because of 2 degrees Celsius part. Okay, then there is going to be extreme droughts and water stress, particularly in Mediterranean region, because when we are looking at 2 degrees Celsius, okay, compared to 1.5 degrees. So they made an analysis, and this report, special report, is also called as SR 1.5. Okay, this report talked about what is going to be the difference in the climate for that 2 degrees Celsius increase or a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. Okay, and when this report came out, this report was also discussed, okay, in the further reports of the IPCC. Okay, and if you look at this section, this finding re-emphasized that an increase in global temperature by 1.5 degrees could cause unavoidable increase in the damage and the ecosystem and human beings. Hence, everybody focused on 1.5 degrees. They don't wanted to increase it more, and everybody focused was to reduce the projected loss and higher warming scenario in such a way that we should be able to reach that 1.5 degrees target. So this table is basically the extract from that report, the special report. Let us go towards the next section, which is the spread of the net zero target. Now, when we talk about this, the spread of the net zero target, okay, before going to this, we'll have a quick set of questions. First question, what is the difference between the 2 degrees Celsius and a 1.5 degrees Celsius? And what was the evidence provided by this report? So if you look at the option, okay, first of all, they're saying that difference is insignificant, significant, insignificant. So this goes out. The answer is either B or C. Okay, and if you read the further find, the report found out an evidence of substantial effect of that extra 0.5 warming, and report found no evidence. So this is the answer. The B is the answer, because we did found substantial effect, okay, of that extra 0.5 degrees Celsius that is there. So the answer is B. Next part, what is the de facto standard against which climate advocates and everybody else is talking about? Is it 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius? So 2 degrees is definitely wrong. So this is gone. Either it's going to be B or D. B talks about the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius was set at Paris, the 2021 Glasgow climate impact, or was it the 2018 special report on impact of this? I think so. This B should be, because this was the committee, this was the pact where it was included in the document. Okay, it was codified. The word is codified. It was codified in 2021 Glasgow Climate Pact. Okay, the special report was just giving information, but every country came down on writing in that Climate Pact meeting. That is why this is the section. Let us go to the second point, the spread of the net zero target. Now, when we talk about this, okay, we have bifurcated between, they've given you some information on the some non-state actors, that means which are not driven by the government, and how they are helping to reduce the how they are helping to reach the net zero scenario. Okay, so net zero has been globally recognized now. There are like in terms of climate commitment, there are 135 countries representing 88% of the emission and 90% of the global GDP. They have made commitment that they will reach towards net zero. Okay, and the commitment has been agreed by November 2021. Okay, and obviously they'll set their dates that okay, we'll reach at this date the net zero situation. Now, when we talk about non-state actors, there is one non-state actor which is the UN Race to Zero, has been very uh, instrumental or very important when we talk about reaching to that net zero level. Okay, promoting this that economy should reach at net zero level. Okay, so this was launched in Conference of Parties at 26 COP. Okay, the intention was to mobilize real economy actors. Real economy actors means companies, institutions, okay, then subnational entities, but not only just the government. Why? Because we wanted to reduce the carbon emission and reach net zero by 2050. Okay, and the UN Race to Zero is basically kind of an umbrella initiative, okay, which partners with other initiative, which includes regions, cities, business, financial institution. Everybody is part of this UN Race to Zero. Okay, and if you want to become a member of this initiative, then you will have to meet the globally defined procedural criteria. Okay, you will have to pledge that we will reach towards net zero emission by 2050 latest. Okay, you can reach before it, that's okay, but you have to agree and you have to show us that how you're going to reach us, please do that level. Okay, so within 18 months, 7,500 entities have joined the Race to Zero Alliance, and because of which there has been more detailed commitment from members including regions, cities, businesses, everybody, that how we are going to reach towards net zero. I'm taking a pause, taking you towards the book. Okay, so the first point talks about that in COP 26, 135 country and everybody talked about net zero commitment. Among non-state actors, the UN Race to Zero campaign plays a very crucial role. Okay, that you're now giving you details of what this initiative is doing. It is focusing on real economy actors like region, city, business, financial center. Okay, and if you want to join the Race to Net Zero, then you have to demonstrate that you being a member, you have a set of globally defined procedure. Okay, on top of this global criteria, individual initiatives. There are two things: global criteria where you are defining that how you are going to reach net zero by 2050. Apart from that, at an individual level, how the member is going to commit and how it is going to reach at that specific target, that also has to be clearly submitted to the committee. Okay, so that is been highlighted till this point. We have completed this section. Now we're going to be, one second, we're going to be moving towards this point. Now there are the UN Race to Zero is one such non-state actor or one such non-state initiative which is used in the right now in the market, but there are others. The problem with these non-state actor pledges, because every other is pledging that we'll reduce carbon. The problem is that there is no rigorous commitment, first of all, and there is no clear strategy. And because of which, even though you have an intermediate target, okay, very little is done to reach to that level. So people are just coming and committing. They are not taking steps to reach to that net zero in other non-state actor pledges. Okay. Now, some of the pledges, they explicitly say that we will reduce carbon. That means we'll reduce CO2. Some of the pledges says that we'll reduce all greenhouse gases. There is huge amount of difference between the scope of the pledge of what are you going to reduce. That is also one challenge that we found. That is also one variation that we found. Okay, some organizations are very transparent. Okay, because they are being whatever efforts that they are taking to offset the climate, they are publicly announcing that. While some are opaque. Opaque means they are not announcing how they will be reaching net zero. They're just pledging that we will reach, but they are not being transparent. So some are transparent, some are not. So variation is very huge. And what is the challenge that we are looking at? Okay, the challenge right now is that we need to develop tools and framework, because we want to distinguish. This is an important point, between credible net zero commitment. Okay, somebody who is actually interested in reaching that net zero level and reducing the carbon emission, those companies, those cities, okay, we should be able to bifurcate them from those who are just making announcement, who are become cynical. Cynically means who are not doing any steps towards net zero, but they're just making announcement. So basically, they want tools and framework to bifurcate between somebody who is genuinely moving towards net zero and someone who is not moving towards net zero. Okay, I'm taking a pause and I'm taking you toward this section. So when we talk about, so this section is there, we are, okay, they are given a table. There's a huge table over here, which covers 2-3 pages. The next, and there's this case study also talking about net zero insurance alliance. We'll come back to these. But over here, when we look at this section, they are saying not all targets are equally created. There is huge amount of variation that we talk about. Okay. Now, what is this variation they're talking about? It also depends upon the scope of emission, okay, or how they are going to achieve net zero, or whether they have any plan to achieve net zero. So that is the variation that has been highlighted. And over this paragraph is nothing but they're talking about countries. They also talked about India. Okay, they have talked about UK and Germany, to give you a reference. Okay, but the landscape, this is where I started discussion. The landscape of non-state actor is very varied. Okay, because somebody is putting forward rigorous commitment with clear strategy. Okay, and others have done just declaration. They have not having any strategy to decarbonize. Okay, some pledges are saying that we will reduce carbon. Some pledges are saying we are reducing all greenhouse gases. Okay, there is huge difference. For example, Apple said that we will, when we are going to reach net zero, we'll focus on scope 1, 2, 3. But ExxonMobil only said we are going to focus on 1 or 2. So there is huge variation. Apart from that, there is transparency related issue also that is there. That has been highlighted over here. So all of these is critical. Now the challenge, the last part, the challenge is to have a clear develop tools and framework, okay, which is going to be implemented in good faith. And we have to know that whoever is actually implementing this strategy in good faith and taking steps, or who has been cynically only making public announcement. So that is the highlight over here. And that when you look at the tables, okay, I've highlighted few sections which are important for you. Not everything is important. So under 2-degree coalition is important. Okay, you should read this part. Then net zero asset management is important. Net zero asset owner alliance is important. And this service is important. Okay. In the book, they've talked about the net zero insurance alliance, okay, which is also being given. The climate pledge is important. So just read these things explicitly before going to the exam. Rest other is given for your information. They will not test you. Okay, what does this initiative talks about? What is this? They will not talk. Basically, check that, because that is practically not possible for anybody to read and remember. Okay, so focus on reading only important few points if you want to. Okay, but overall the table is not very important. Then there is tech zero also, which I've highlighted. Pledge to net zero is also very important. Just you can read those sections if you want to, as compared to the other pointers. Then there is a case study. Again, the case study is telling us when you want to become a net zero alliance member, okay, what are you supposed to do? So if you want to join this alliance, you have to sign a statement of commitment that is tailored for insurance market, and it will help you to reach at UN race to zero. Okay. Now, how do we do it? They've set some examples. Okay. Now, if you read this entire point, the ultimate example is this: developing and offering insurance and reinsurance product and solution and arrangement for low emission and zero emission technology. That means we'll have to give insurance facility as a member towards something which is developing zero carbon technology or zero carbon business. Okay. And while doing this, we should not ignore the nature-based solution. If you remember, in one of the previous chapter, we had a table also, okay, which talks about what is nature-based solution. For example, within that was you cannot just plant tree because it is not going to bring diversity. It is not going to be a permanent solution, right? So all of this is being discussed over here. Okay, what are the key to net zero transition is that you as a being, as an insurance company, you have to provide services. This is important. So that is the reason I've highlighted. Rest other is very generic generic commitment that you have to do if you want to become the net zero insurance alliance member. Okay. Let us complete. We have completed the second portion of this. We'll be looking at quick questions with respect to the second part. Which non-state actor played a very crucial role in mobilizing the real economic actors? It was UN Race to Zero campaign. We explicitly talked about this. So remember the name for this chapter, UN Race to Zero. The next, what is the main challenge which is posed by the variety of non-state actor pledge mentioned? So what is happening over here is whether the transparency was a major problem, okay, or the major challenge that we are facing, or absence of clear strategy. Is that a major challenge for us right now? Or is it basically distinguishing between a critical commitment and cynically? What is this point that somebody who is serious, we should be able to distinguish, we should have tools and framework to distinguish between somebody who is serious about net zero and somebody who is just making announcements. So this is the point which we are looking at, the C point.